Round two is upon us in the 2026 AFL Toyota Premiership season as all 18 teams have played their games to kickstart the campaign. So much to get through here on the AFL show. Out on the Full podcast, brought to you on the Scoreboard Media Network site as I welcome back Woody for another episode. Woody, welcome back to the show.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. It's been another difficult week as a St Kilda supporter, but otherwise it's good to have footy back, as tough as it might be. It's good to see your face again, mate. How did you enjoy the weekend?
It was really good, Woody. I enjoyed so much of the games, and I think the North Melbourne win over Port Adelaide was the biggest highlight from round one, considering it's taken now, this is what, Clarkson's fourth season, and 2023, of course, what happened, he took personal leave in that, and feels though it's only one game in, but they've got the components there to really make a launch for it. And just defensively too is going to be the other part, I think, to watch for the season's entirety, how they do defend from turnover and in transition, because when they come up against the really good teams, such as Adelaide, Brisbane, Sydney, they'll be really put to the test in that regard. But a really positive start for the Roos first up.
Definitely so. And it'll be interesting to see what they can do in the coming weeks with a slightly softer draw, and hopefully they start to propel up the ladder. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Well, this first month's definitely in their favour, the Kangaroos, with how the draw's looking for them. We'll start off with some AFL news, Woody, and this came through yesterday with former Carlton and Geelong 2022 Premiership player Zach Tui when he was asked about the potential of reintroducing and bringing back, rather, the International Rules Series, which hasn't been in place since 2017, the last time it was held down under. And we've seen for many years, since about, 2000, just the number of different biffs and brawls that occurred. The famous 2006 one, which we spoke off air before doing this podcast, and what transpired and all those different things. It's a very different view almost of the game, especially how the AFL footballers are able to adapt so quickly from an oval-shaped ball to a round ball, and how difficult it is to kick the leather. And, of course, Zach, having played Gaelic football before he came down under in 2010 and joined Carlton's list at the time, that he knows well and truly inside out sort of the really almost this unique essence about the game. And I think it just sort of brings everyone together. And just your thoughts on this too, and hopefully seeing the reintroduction of the game hopefully next year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I was a big fan when I was a younger child watching these things. I mentioned earlier I enjoyed the fights as well. Look, I don't think there'd be quite as many of those if we were to reintroduce it going forward. That being said, I'd love to see it. I think we've got a lot more Gaelic or converts from Irish football over to Australian football. It's Kilda. We've got three, or we will at some point this year get the third on board. And there's a few at a multitude of clubs now. So it could be a nice sort of blending of the guards and kind of a good maybe way to reintroduce the olive branch in terms of discussions with the Gaelic Association, because I know some of them aren't so happy with how many converts that we have. But otherwise, I'm very excited.
They probably weren't too happy as well about the number of fights that did transpire down. I think there were a few during when the 2017 series occurred, and just a little bit of fair amount of niggle too, considering with the AFL and just how hard it is in every single facet of the game too, with all the bumps, crunches and tackles that transpire throughout 120 minutes of football. And Gaelic football is a little bit on the different end too, but the skill of it though is just completely vastly different, and just everything that goes with it. Do you have any further takes away too, considering we saw in 2020 it was meant to go ahead, and then of course COVID came in and completely halted everything, and 2 years later they were meant to have a series. There were still COVID restrictions at the time, so it couldn't go ahead as well. Just any sort of further concluding thoughts to this?
Well, it was a shame that it kind of went away. I think we did start to kind of put the toes back in the water just before COVID, and unfortunately we had to shut up shop. But I mean, from memory, and it's been a while now to be fair, I believe they got away with the series win at the end of it all. It'd be good to get it up and running again, whether we see those massive fights or not, to at least have a crack at winning back the International Rules Series Cup. So hopefully they get it up and running again and we can bring the cup home to Australia.
And that definitely would be a side too if that does transpire and everything that has gone down in the long rivalry that has been instilled between the two countries and since it first started all the way back to at least 26 years ago, and hopefully it will carry on once it does come back into place. There was something else, Woody, that was really interesting. The first couple of rounds, and of course you've been all across it, but these first couple of weeks, we've already seen two games already where both teams have scored over 100 points apiece. It only happened 5 times in season 2025, and even if we go back to the 1990s, 1980s, early 2000s and that, there were so many games where both teams will kick 100 points, and it sort of became the norm in a sense that defense, not to say that defense wasn't a priority, but there probably wasn't a lot of zeroing ins because so much of the game was played one-on-one, and we saw during the mid-2010s how coaches really decided to clog up the field and make it extremely difficult. There'll be essentially no one in the forward half. All 36 players on the field will be camped down the opposition team's defensive 50, forward half. So how have you assessed thus far, these first couple of weeks, how this has all transpired? The AFL, of course, looking to make further implementations to free up the game. Of course, we're still going to see dribs and drabs over a 5, 10, 15-minute period where there's a ton of congestion around the ground. But, of course, eventually as the game progresses, more fatigue sets into place and means the ground opens up a lot more. Your assessment of this?
Yeah, we're in an interesting time of football. I think we are on the precipice of seeing more an attacking style come back into vogue. And look, the early signs are there. Ball movement numbers tend to be up. Scoring numbers, as we've mentioned, tend to be up. And I think this, look, this is a good thing in a lot of ways. I remember when I was younger, like I keep coming back to St Kilda, but like I remember Fraser Garrick kicking his 100th goal and kind of thinking, geez, like I wonder who the next guy it's going to be. Like maybe it's Cozzy, maybe it's Rewalt, blah, blah, blah. And we've never had one at St Kilda since. And there hasn't been many 100-goal kickers since then. I think might only be the two in Buddy and maybe Favola as well, if he got one after that. I can't quite remember.
So Favola finished with 99 in 2008.
Okay, yeah. See, I wasn't sure if he got another year in there where he got over the line or not. But no, it's I think it's a good thing. I mean, we've seen what it can do, right? Like, I mean, it basically, I think we saw early days of it, even from Melbourne in the premiership that they got, just turning on in half a game of footy. It can just put the opposition in a position where they really have to restructure. And half of football is, can you do the things you want with trying to make the opposition compromise what they want to do? Because the more you can do what you want and they're not doing what they want, hopefully you're getting closer to a win, right? So I think this is really good for certain teams that have been, had this aggressive edge in the past. Bulldogs, we've already had a few people mentioning what might happen throughout the year if they continue their form. We saw Adelaide progress from a near bottom 4 side to the first in the minor season. So yeah, I mean it seems like it's the way things are going, and I'm a big fan of it. I think there will be change, obviously, as some of these rules have implemented this sort of game style, and perhaps there needs to be more balance struck going down the line. Like, how do you counter these sort of strategies? I don't think everybody can just do a shootout forever. So yeah, it's interesting. We're on the dawn of a new type of football, and I think we could look back to eras such as Pagan's Paddock. We could look at how Sydney and West Coast went about their differences with offense and defense. Even looking at St Kilda's defensive structures through the more attacking styles of Geelong and Hawthorn through those eras. I think we're in another sort of era of great change. in football if we do let these rules play out for a while. I think we do like to change rules a little bit, but it seems to have worked fairly well in at least what we're trying to achieve so far. So I'm a big fan, but mate, not everybody's loving the big goals kicked. There's a few lopsided score lines as well. What do you think? Is this a good thing for football, the more aggressive play?
Well, having been a follower for at least the last 23 years, Woody, I completely attest to everything you say. And I think it's better for the game too, because we've seen so many times, and I refer back to this during especially 2015-16, that those two particular seasons where a lot of the games were pretty mundane and you're just waiting for something to happen almost within a 5-10 minute patch, someone to completely take the game by the scruff of the neck. And sort of, I remember at the end of the 2016 season at Richmond and the disaster campaign they had. They only won 8 games for the entire year. And of course, Hardwick's going basically back to square one, essentially, on rebranding the game plan, bringing back this almost vibrancy within the club, because he had gone so tense about everything, the scrutiny that had been placed upon him, that he thought, well, screw this. I'm going to go back and just almost just enjoy it as though I started playing it a long time ago, as he did, right, from 1992 essentially to 2004, and was one of the most hardest men in the backline, and was one of the big reasons too for Essendon winning that 2000 flag, because they had such a dominant back six. But his plan was, we're just going to completely refurbish our game style, and look what happened in 2017. Started kicking big bags of goals over 100 points on most occurring bases. It all started in the round one game against Carlton when they kicked 132 points, and saw in the prelim final against the Giants, I think they kicked about 108 points or something, or 114, something along those lines from memory. So that's where I think the whole attacking game style had completely changed for the Tigers. And I go back to your Saints, Woody, and a lot of the narrative, of which is true, that St Kilda's a very dour team defensively. They can clog down teams for 40, 45 minutes and make it a 12, 13 goal arm wrestle for the game's entirety. But that 2009 season, St Kilda were one of the highest scoring teams in the league. Yeah. We look at the West Coast game, they kicked, 161 points in round 3. So it's not as though they couldn't pile on points if they wanted to. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a long time now. So, and I was in high school, so it's hard to remember everything clearly. But yeah, I vaguely, if I haven't got my years mistaken, I believe Rewalt had a big knee issue early in the 2010 season, and was out until about round 17 or so, which kind of changed St Kilda's offensive line from the year prior. And Cozzy was kind of in and out of the side at that point as well, with his own issues, which kind of forced St Kilda to be like, all right, well, if we can only kick maybe 80, 90 points in a game, because we don't think we can get that 120 anymore, I guess we've got to keep everybody under 60. So I think that's kind of where that style of gameplay really developed. I mean, Ross had already experimented a bit with Paul Roos at Sydney and whatnot. But I think that's where he doubled down on some of those techniques. And look, you could say some of it still exists. As a Saints fan, watching Melbourne kick over 120 points on us on the weekend, wish he'd reach into the bag a little more often occasionally. But otherwise, yeah, look, there's going to be a to and fro in offensive and defensive styles. I think right now we've got to lean towards the offensive style of movement. It's going to be a bit more gunslinging in terms of style of football. And look, that'll hold fat until we have a new style emerge to challenge it. And whether we get that this year, next year, or the year after, it will happen at some point. It just depends who's smart enough to come up with the counter attack.
Otherwise, St Kilda might be reverting back to that game against Gold Coast when only won by 3 points, and I think only 14 goals or 13 goals were combined that night under the roof at Docklands. You mentioned Rewald's injury, Woody, 16 years ago. So that happened against Collingwood, that Friday night game with the exchange between Stephen Milne and coach Mick Malthouse at quarter time, and Rewald was going out for a leading mark, and he, of course, pulled his hamstring. I think Simon Prestigiacomo was only a couple of metres behind him in the one-on-one contest, and he missed the next 3 months. I think returned against Brisbane in round 15, and we saw the following season, at least for the first 2 months, he had a ton of the goal-kicking yips. It was so strange to see that you normally think 40 metres out of Nick Rewald's calibre that he'd kick it right through the middle, but it just never occurred for at least the first half of the 2011 season until finally he got his radar going. So it was just something really interesting in that aspect too, and how he was able to bounce back and sort of the differences with, of course, the Saints and season by season. We saw, I think, a little bit of Scott Waters too during his time as well, and Alan Richardson, the 2017 season for the Saints. Do you have any final concluding thoughts to this, Woody?
The less we can talk about St Kilda in the mid 2015s or whatever, the better, to be honest. But no, I think football's in a good space for now.
We definitely will, Woody. We'll move on from that now, and we'll get stuck into the round 2 games, which all starts at the MCG on Thursday night between Hawthorn and Sydney. The Swans without 2 of its most important stars. Errol Goulden out to at least July with a dislocated shoulder in the tackle from Lincoln McCarthy early in the last quarter, and Isaac Heaney is out for this game with hamstring tightness. Swans coach Dean Cox spoke about it in his presser that they didn't want to run the risk with Sydney's superstar after just a short 5-day turnaround, and the Hawks rebounded back over the Bombers quite convincingly by 62 points. How do you assess this too, Woody? Because we saw Hawthorn pretty much right from the first 60 seconds of the game cut up the Bombers, and the Swans too were extremely impressive against the undermanned Brisbane. Just some of your areas of focus you think they're going to be decisive?
This will be a tough game. I think if you feel like you know the outcome of this match, you're probably fooling yourself a little bit. This is a tough one to pick, mostly because I think had there been no injuries to either side, the midfield battle probably leans Sydney's way. But I mean, both sides are missing some of their best players through there. Sydney hopefully gets Heaney back soon enough, and it's terrible what happened to Goulden as a super coach owner. But otherwise, I'm struggling to pick this one because I don't put a ton of credence in the results of their match against the Bombers. I just wonder how much that translates to an average AFL side, to be frank. With Hawthorn, they're probably above an average AFL side in many areas. So it'll come down to if connection still exists for Sydney despite having 2 of these major pieces out. I think Justin McInerney is going to be a big highlight for this match. He's already started the season incredibly, but for Sydney to maintain their strong start to the year, I think him out of the guts this week will be quite important. And I think it'll really come down to can they hit their targets inside 50, because Hawthorn definitely has a strong defensive unit, if not one of the most defensive units in the league. But yeah, it's not going to hold up if there is not enough transition or there isn't enough ball winning first hands ability happening. So it'll be an interesting showdown. I think it really comes down to if Grundy gives the first tap out and Sydney get dominant from the midfield, it'll be hard to stop them. But if there's a solid challenge from the midfield, I think this goes all the way.
Yeah, I think the Swans probably have to rotate a lot of players through in the middle of the ground with the 2 absences of Goulden and Heaney, and Riley Bass, who's had a good start. He had a really good first season last campaign, 2025. Matt Roberts has spent a lot more time in the middle, and he's also one of Sydney's best ball users too by foot. So they do have the resources there, Sydney, to worry the Hawks. And Hawthorn have adjusted a little bit with their midfield brigade this season. We saw Connor McDonald spend a lot more time on ball in the first game against the Giants, and it has given them that different dimension, I think. But the other part is with Hawthorn's 2-prong ruck attack, which has worked so well. And we saw last season how the adjustment with Lloyd Meek basically taking over as the number 1 ruck mantle from Ned Reeves, pushing him out of the side. And now Hawthorn decided, well, we'll go with both of them and try and hopefully stretch the opposition if they only go with 1 ruckman. And so that's going to be a big test because Grundy essentially acts as another midfielder for the Swans. And we saw last season an absolute renaissance return to form. And so far this campaign too, through the first couple of games, he's looked really good yet again. So whether he can also stretch either Meek or Reeves going the other way and push them deep inside their defensive 50, or vice versa with Reeves and Meek, and try and make Grundy accountable the other way too, and try and make him defend, because I think Hawthorn have an advantage in that area. And there's small forwards, of course, with Ginnivan and Watson. The amount of work they do up the ground, which Ginnivan for his last couple of seasons, I reckon since he did cross over from the Pies at the end of 2023, has been the biggest almost transformation in his game now. And you look at the numbers and you think, when he was at Collingwood, he was getting, 10, 11 touches. And now he's getting 16 to 20 disposals a game. But his metres gained is the one that's going through the roof now, 400 to 450, because he's doing so much of the spade work going up the ground and then bolting the other way. And it's such a strong suit of Hawthorn's. But I think also defensively for them, the whole connecting pieces for them have looked really good, barring, of course, the opening round loss to the Giants. And it's going to be a big test for the Swans. They're big forwards too, of Amati, Charlie Curnow down there, trying to compete and not allow for Hawthorn's intercept defenders to repel and counter-attack that easily. Any other analysis from what you expect, Woody?
No, I'd just like to add for Hawthorn, I've quite enjoyed Watson getting some midfield minutes. I think it's necessary while they're experimenting without Will Day, and really trying to hone in on kind of the longer term group that will surround Newcomb. So I'm loving the sort of moments he's getting in there. He seems to be excelling so far in the minimal time that he's had. Would like to see Weddle get in there a little bit as well. And yeah, so far the sort of experiments they've had with their younger players is proving at least worth continuing, if not an outright success.
And Josh Ward had an outstanding game too last week. One of the top two games so far in his career, going back to last year's game against the Western Bulldogs at Marvel Stadium, where he had 27 touches and was one of Hawthorn's best players that night on ground. The next game, which takes us to the City of Churches on Friday night at the Adelaide Oval between the Adelaide Crows and the Western Bulldogs. And we saw last year in the corresponding game at Marvel Stadium how the Crows were able to almost sieve through the Bulldogs' defence quite easily throughout the course. And they were brilliant last week against Collingwood. They got that burst early in the third quarter where they kicked, 4 goals in at least a 10-minute span, got out to a 5-goal lead and then held off Collingwood in the last quarter, which I think has been the biggest development within, I think, for Adelaide, particularly last season and, of course, what happened last Saturday night. And the Western Bulldogs were just absolutely clinical against the Giants, smashing them by 82 points. Some of your assessment from this one too, especially with the defences and some maybe the shutdown roles you expect, Woody?
Yeah, so I think this is going to be... I penciled this in as one of the more entertaining games early in the season, as soon as the fixture came out. Adelaide last year was incredible with ball movement going forward, simply near unstoppable in periods of the year. Looking at what the Bulldogs could be and have dished up at times throughout, not only early this year, but last year and points prior to that as well. They are a strong offensive unit. So if I'm real, I'm not sure how much lockdown work we're going to see. I think this might be the biggest arm wrestle we've seen in football in a while. And I'm low-key hoping we're getting very, very high scores from both sides in a monumental shootout.
And Adelaide will have its biggest challenge too, trying to contain Sam Darcy and Aaron Norton up forward. Both of them were exceptional last week against the Giants and caused their fair number of problems to Adelaide's defence last time the sides did meet. So we have seen last season how teams try to double team Sam Darcy, but it just doesn't work because Norton's so good pushing up the ground. And I think the other part which is underrated with both of them, and particularly Norton, is his ability to bring the ball to ground level and allow Riley West to crumb. And that's where the Bulldogs are one of the best. Last season, they were the best 450 ground ball team by at least a few number compared to the next best team. So I think that's one to definitely watch out for with what the Western Bulldogs do with that. The tag for Adelaide on Marcus Bontempelli, it's probably, they have done it a few times last season. They put Sam Berry on a few run with players, including Jai Newcomb when Hawthorn Adelaide played down in Tasmania in round 14 last season. So I think that potentially is the way Adelaide may go with this too, because I think the only other issue is though too, they can put Bontempelli up forward and he can still cause so much damage there. And the Bulldogs' flexibility throughout now, we've seen these, at least through the first game this season, playing Matt Kennedy and Tom Liberatore across half-back for short stints just allows that whole in-depth rotation that they do have to rotate through and cause a fair number of problems. Sam Davidson, of course, was pretty solid last week. So I think this one should be pretty close yet again, and it's just going to be who knows, honestly, Woody, with this one too.
I think that both of these sides are so well developed from the centre line going forward. And look, were there no injuries, I'd probably lean Adelaide's way defensively. But with Mark Keane out, and look, I don't think, and you've already mentioned, I don't think he'd do a ton on a Darcy. Maybe he's a slightly better suited to a Norton than others there. But again, I think this is if English can get on top and give first hands, then you're going to start seeing the Bulldogs score very quickly. And then likewise, if McAndrew or Murray manages to start getting these hit outs, again, I think, I'm not sure if Isaac Rankin's back this week. I might have gotten that wrong, but just forward of the ball, Adelaide is incredibly dangerous. So it's one of those ones where I think, yes, you could send Sam Berry to Bont, but you're still dealing with 100 headaches. In some ways, if you can just play your game and get it done, I think most coaches would be more happy to do that than play the chess match mid-match. But we'll see what happens. I think this really comes down to who dominates centre, because once it's going forward, it's probably scoring.
And definitely will be an interesting part too for how both teams are really attacking sides anyway. Crows, of course, took that step forward rather, last season. On to the first game on Saturday at the MCG between Richmond and Gold Coast, Woody. The sides met a couple of times last season. The Tigers upset Gold Coast in the first meeting in round 6 at Docklands by 11 points, where they led by 43 points at three-quarter time and had to hold off a furious Suns rally in the final 30 minutes of the contest. And then last season, Gold Coast completely dominated the Tigers, holding to only 2 goals 11 for the entire afternoon, winning, I think it was by 84 points that Saturday afternoon. I think this one's going to be, of course, it's a great test for Richmond, right? And we saw that when their forward half pressure is on and when they can cover the field extremely well, that they can lock the ball in their forward half and play it on their terms. But against the Suns, and we've already seen the first 2 games already, the transition from the back 50 is absolutely cut both at this stage, Geelong, and so far with the West Coast Eagles to ribbons. Just your thoughts on this too, with how potentially the Tigers and the whole forward half pressure and the crucial aspect it will play to at least somehow effectively eliminating Gold Coast run from their back half.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's almost an impossible challenge in some regards. If we're looking for like a good match out of Richmond, I'm not really expecting a win, to be fair. I'd like them to pull a rabbit out of the hat and get another 2-goal win, but I feel like their side, unfortunately, isn't ready to match it with the top guys particularly. So yeah, this is a danger game. It could be one of those morale killers. That being said, the Tigers did look significantly better than a side of their ladder position, should, against a somewhat competitive Carlton. And look, had Lynchy kicked straight, that perhaps could have been a dominant win. So I guess, look, football's a funny game, and maybe these sort of things that you think are a 1% chance are happening, that you're probably underestimating it a little bit. It's probably more than once in 100 that Richmond's able to get it done. So while I say there's almost no chance of Richmond winning, that there is obviously a chance, and look, hopefully they just bring the same effort as last week, and then who knows.
It's definitely one that will be extremely an intriguing one to watch on, and with Gold Coast. And the other part, I think, Woody, that has been probably the next step within the Suns is throwing Will Powell into the middle for the first two games, and just his clearance work last week against West Coast. That almost those first two steps, the burst that he was able to almost accelerate away. I think is that's probably one of the most sort of underrated weapons I think Gold Coast have pulled the magnet on this season, because they've got so much assurity in their back six to play with now that they can throw Powell into midfield, which technically he was drafted as a midfielder before spending, of course, those first, the best part of 7 seasons as a defender, right? So I think it's a really good move from Coach Damien Hardwick. And just your assessment on it.
He's looked amazing this year. Since the State of Origin match, he's just come out swinging. Not one I particularly expected to kind of go into that midfield brigade. I figured if there was some room available throughout the year, and we know Matty Rowell's coming back, that you're probably testing the waters with some of the kids that haven't had this chance and have also been brought in as midfielders, but. Yeah, look, as somebody that's been on the list for quite some time, 7-8 years, as you've mentioned, he probably deserves first crack at it, and he's making every opportunity count. So I think at this point he's looking to firm up that spot as the third midfielder alongside Matty Rowell and Noah Anderson, as Touk has kind of moved into a more rotational role. There's obviously a little bit on offer for some of these others that might get a chance here and there, Lombard, Rogers, things like that. But yeah, they've got an amazing lineup. Their ability to transition from the deepest parts of their defence to the forward line is through great coaching and structure, but as well as skill to execute and remain calm when the pressure comes. So look, Will Powell has been given an opportunity that does come with more pressure, and right now he's excelling. So I love to see it.
And the array of midfield depth the Suns do have is just absolutely miles apart thus far from some of the best teams at the moment, and we've already seen that with throwing Christian Petrarca up forward. Bailey Humphrey didn't play against the Eagles. They can also throw him into midfield from time to time. So there's such an abundance that Gold Coast do have where whenever someone is getting tagged, they can put someone else on and just cause a fair amount of headaches through the middle of the ground. On to the next game, the Twilight game at NG Stadium, Woody. GWS and St Kilda, and you already spoke about it on Saints TV with Jake breaking down the loss to Melbourne where the Saints conceded 120 points and went down to start 0-2 this season. The Giants, well, it wasn't the first time they got hammered by the Western Bulldogs last season by 88 points, but they got absolutely obliterated again by 82 points. Just some of the focus areas, do you think almost transition-wise and almost defensive transition was the biggest part from the Saints' loss to Melbourne last Sunday? Your thoughts on this too, because the Giants, of course, with their speed, and St Kilda have shown they're more than capable of doing it. Just what do you think is going to be the most vital aspect, do you think, particularly within the defensive transition?
Yeah, St Kilda's, and I've kind of gone around the edges of how I think this is kind of going wrong in a few different ways. But I think essentially what's happening is St Kilda has somewhat robbed Peter to pay Paul. And it's essentially, we had a lot of movement coming from defence, which, maybe wasn't always getting inside 50, but it was kind of going at a slightly better clip than it has been in terms of goals per inside 50. Looking at this year, we're getting it inside 50 more, and we're just using it worse. So it's not getting to our targets as often, which, all it takes is one or two people out of position when you're running forward. If you turn the ball over and there's a quick slingshot as footy's progressing towards, it's a run back to the goal situation. And when you've got four key defenders on our field as we've decided to do this year, you don't always have the leg speed matching the younger players. So I think St Kilda's getting caught out the back particularly badly this year. I believe they're running at, I think it was 68 points against over the two matches so far on 16 shots from turnover. So St Kilda needs to hone in, and this is kind of what I mentioned and alluded to earlier. I'd like Ross to reach into his bag a little bit more and kind of go, all right, boys, I know how to do defense. Let's stop letting oppositions kick 100 on us. I know it's early. It only happened once, and Collingwood didn't get that same sort of score line, but the generation of score has been fairly similar from both matches. So, at this point, it's time for the Saints to lock in, because we all know about the orange tsunami. We all know how they like to get their wheels going and get back to goal. So this is an opportunity for St Kilda to kind of work on some issues, hopefully lock down some problems that have been eluding them, and maybe take their first proper step forward into 2026. But it'll be a tough match. There's a lot of strength forward of the ball for the Giants. They've got quite a few good tall targets, a few out as well. We'll see how Krasinski might match up against a Caminiti or someone like that. But it'll be an interesting match. Likewise, with St Kilda not having the biggest targets forward of the ball, we might see Rowan Marshall come back in and play that forward role. But he was out with concussion, and the backups to him. Simply Owens and Sharman, who are probably more suited to that sort of third tall role, not quite as big. So it'll be interesting now that they don't have the defence that they'd normally lean towards with Sam Taylor and kind of more younger players like like Joel Fonte, sort of even converts like Levade coming in to play a role. So it'll be an interesting matchup. A lot of new stuff happening in the midfield for both sides, so it'll be hard to get a read on this prior to the bounce.
Joe Fonte had an excellent second half last season, Woody, and remember there was a few games where he did some really good shutdown roles. I think one on Tom Papley in the second derby matchup when the Giants were down by 35 points at halftime and piled on 9 third quarter goals, and of course that documentary which came out with the Giants and Adam Kingsley's almost just putting his finger through the whiteboard pretty much, and there was, I think, probably about 50 different expletives that transpired during his rev-up speech to try and get the team up and going. So he's been great for them, and Connor Iden's normally been one of the shutdowns, sort of small to medium. He's not a small defender. That's not the best way to put it, but he's always been one of those medium defenders who can also play above his size, and we saw that last season on Jeremy Cameron when the Giants played Geelong in round 18 at NG Stadium, and he's probably going to have that matchup probably on Jack Higgins, or they may leave it for Fonte, because they did a really good job on shutting down Higgins' influence when the sides did meet late last season, and the Giants have put Harry Ralston through midfield, and of course he got absolutely towed up by Marcus Bontempelli because the Giants had no answers. So that's probably another one too I think the Giants have managed to at least unlock, because he's sort of been there, but he hasn't been able to quite almost cement his place in 23 because of how deep the Giants midfield does bat into. So I think it's a really good opportunity for him, and whether he does get that tagging role on the Zai Wanganeen-Malera. And speaking on that, Woody, too, because we've already seen with Harry Perryman in the opening round, we saw it with Colton Tolstrup where the Saints had to move Nazaya up forward in the last quarter. And we saw that in the second half of last season, where teams put a lot of attention onto him and did everything in their power to mitigate his production. How much do you see that as a valuable learning curve for Nazaya as he receives this amount of attention going forward from opposition teams?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's a lot of different takes in the St Kilda world. Whether whether all of them have merit or not is debatable. But look, if we take the club at face value, Naz gets sort of license to go around the ground, and perhaps there's some people, if that is the case, that don't want that entire license if he's going to stay in the forward line for bloody a quarter of the match or something. So look, I think there's a coaching and sort of learning experience happening as it's evolving. Clearly, there's a new role for Nazaya here, and whether he learns to shape these tags, whether this forward line role kind of develops more longer term, I think that's a bit more of an anybody's guess at this stage. I think a lot of cards are still in the air at this point, so I wouldn't be surprised, considering the results out of the first 2 weeks, to see a tag go to Nazaya. That being said, I think at some point it feels like it's going to stop working. Somebody that can run end to end with the speed and precision he has with ball use and just danger in finding targets. I think we've already seen it click before. So it just comes down to, when does it next kind of click again? Whether that's this week or not, we'll see. If a Ralston ends up on Naz, I wouldn't hate that result. But I probably would have said the same thing about Colstrip, and I don't love the outcome of that match. So it'll be an interesting one. It's gone kind of pretty close to the wire throughout the last few matches between the two clubs. So if St Kilda does lose again, I hope that's kind of the result.
Well, no team wants to start. Well, of course, St Kilda don't want to start their season 0-3, and the Giants don't want to fall to 1-2. We'll move on from the game at NG Stadium, the Twilight encounter, onto the Saturday night game, which takes us to Optus Stadium between Fremantle and Melbourne. And the D's, of course, getting the new era under Stephen King underway with that win over St Kilda at the MCG, a complete revitalisation of their game style, which King, of course, had that experience as a player when he was at Geelong, and we saw how attacking they were when the whole Geelong dynasty started in the early 2007 season as an assistant at the Western Bulldogs under coach Luke Beveridge. And Fremantle were really good for at least the best part of 3 quarters, and in just the last turn they completely ran out of petrol tickets and got overrun by Geelong, losing by 10 points. The Dockers have still got a couple of players at least out for this game, Luke Ryan and Brendan Cox. I don't think we'll go too much into that, because normally first rounds, when you play your first game each season, it does take that while to adjust into it. But start firstly with probably the counterintuitive differences do you think we may see, particularly with the way Melbourne's playing now and how they want to approach the game, and Fremantle too, which we see from time to time they can really be super aggressive, and then at times we'll see for at least a period block where they'll just be very conservative.
Yeah, look, it's tough to assess because there is such a new side with Melbourne. If we look at their midfield, obviously they've still got Gawn, and he's one of the best ruckmen of all time. So I think you could chuck him in with most midfields and he'd do all right. They did look all right against the Saints. They managed to win centre clearance, but didn't get the stoppage done, which is, realistically, that's always been one of St Kilda's strengths. And I think they generally match up prior Melbourne to, all the changes they've had, fairly okay in the stoppage ball. So I'm buoyed by what I've seen from them to start the season. Van Rooyen was obviously incredible, kicking 6 goals, 5 in the first half. Myercheck looks like the partner that he's needed for years. With the 2 cousins up forward with the Pickets, they look amazing. And it's very frustrating as a Saints fan to watch a first game a stroll away from everybody in your side and into an open goal. But that being said, this is a very new side. So whether you see consistency out of these sort of performances is also another question. And Fremantle's got a lot more of sort of the same units playing year on year, and hopefully more sort of with that time, more understanding of their system and what they want to do. So if you kind of take it all into consideration, as all of us try to do when tipping and whatnot, I'd probably be leaning Freo's way. But yeah, Melbourne's come out and surprised me a lot. So look, maybe they surprise me again.
And we'll see what does occur with this too, because we saw a couple of years ago when the sides did play, Fremantle just completely dominated Melbourne. There was a point, I think the inside 50 count, they put it up and it was completely staggering the first quarter. And I think it was something in the realms of about 19 inside 50s to 2 or something when they did play, I think, late in 2024. And it was a comfortable Fremantle victory. And I think last year we saw when they did play in round 6, it was, I think, Melbourne's first win of the season. And they just reverted their game style. They played super attacking. They did a really good job shutting out Caleb Sarong, and the tag we saw of Ed Langdon last season, which he played, which that may happen again, may not happen again. Maybe Tolstrup again gets it this weekend. So I think what we've seen already is King's very proactive in putting players in positions or roles that they don't normally play, but they're willing to accept it and take it head on and embrace it. And I think that's been probably the biggest thing, and it's only one game, but it looks good. And the forward structure was always going to be another aspect for Melbourne, and so much of the inside 50 deliberation debates for the last 7-8 years on how they enter the ball inside 50. Well, last week against St Kilda, it looked really good on paper, right? So I think that's more you can ask for, and that's the big part when you play against Fremantle's defence, is that you've got to, same as Hawthorn, you've got to try and stretch them out and not allow Pearce to come in as third man or to intercept. And the same if Ryan does get up for Saturday's clash too, because he's such a good intercept marker and rebounder from Fremantle's defensive 50. We'll move on now to the first game on Sunday at the Adelaide Oval between Port Adelaide and Essendon. The Bombers getting absolutely run over by Hawthorn by 62 points, and Port Adelaide too were, at least for the first quarter, pretty good against North Melbourne, and after that were just completely all at sea, losing by 46 points. Your assessment of this too, because we talked about this, right, with defensive transition for St Kilda. This has been a problem of Essendon's for 3 seasons, I reckon. And there was one game on that Friday night in Gather Round against Port Adelaide where they were completely slaughtered on that end, Woody. Just your take from this.
Yeah, look, the Bombers are in rebuild. And I mean, I joke about them a little bit. I'm probably a bit meaner than I should be, but like they do questionable things for me, and I genuinely don't understand where their list structure and their long-term goals are at, because on one hand you see, clear development towards a side that, needs bits and pieces, and they get addressed with bringing in Kakos and Al Akshars and these small forwards that were needed, a caddy to assist a tall forward that was needed. They go and get another Dyson Sharp who, they give a game straight away. And we've had problems on the backline and movement from backline 4 years for Essendon. They picked up Jacob Farrow and then they don't play him. And then they have a situation where they have a captain that they don't let leave because for whatever reason, and look, whether they justified or not in that is debatable. But for me, it's these list decisions and match day decisions are just very questionable, and it just doesn't feel like a club that is aligned in what they need to achieve to get back to being a major club that they were. So I think hopefully this is, the rudder being solidly aligned, and there's going to be a little bit of wiggle before it gets back to where you want to be. But I don't know if we're going to see much better from Essendon this week. I liked what I saw from Port from bits and pieces of last week, and I just didn't like anything that I saw from Essendon. And I think they really need to just go in on what half their fans are saying, what the media and external noise is saying, and really just go, all right, well, probably not going to win a premiership. We've got a kid in Farrow that we need help in the back line. Play him. Like, it might not work out. Maybe he gets 11 disposals like he did in the preseason, and only 2/3 of them hit the target. But you're not winning a premiership this year, and you need to figure this out sooner than later. So I'm maybe being harsh, and I've been accused of that before with Essendon, so I won't not acknowledge that. But I think they need to pull their finger out and get the kids playing, all of them. They've got most of them playing. They obviously need Kako back, but there's no point in not playing Farah. That was a silly decision, and the contract discussions, personally, I don't think they're great decisions either.
I'd say many Bombers of fans attest to your statement right there, Woody, for many years, of course, having not won a final since 2004. And that game 2 years ago at Adelaide Oval with Horn Francis, Butters and Rosie, they combined for 93 disposals that night. Connor Rosie, I think, got the 3 Brownlow votes with 36 touches, 3 goals. Horn Francis, I think, had 31 touches and kicked a goal. And their work, that centre clearance that night, we're talking about 2 years ago, but speed is the big thing in Port Adelaide's book, which they've been renowned for since they entered the league in 1997. And Mark Williams, of course, Choco was the big architect for that. And we saw there was that lull period and Hinkley comes back and all of a sudden, whack, they're back again. And I think that's going to be a worry for Essendon. And if they do get sieved apart, then it's not going to be too good. But if there's a sort of on the contrary, what happened round 3 last season when they pretty much had the same external criticisms placed upon them and they go out and beat Port Adelaide that Thursday night by 12 points. So it could work either way for what does transpire on Sunday. Any further rounding thoughts, Woody?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. As much as, I mentioned it earlier with Richmond too, you can sit there and just be sure that something's going to happen in football. But there's no guarantees in this sport. And look, you bring your A game to every match and I mean, there's so many. I feel like I quote this every second week or so, but I think Ross Lyon says that there's about 5% between teams on a good day at AFL level. And maybe that's it. Maybe you just need to be that 2 or 3% better and you just fly home.
And the final game takes us to round 2, Woody. West Coast and North Melbourne at Optus Stadium. And the Roos, of course, already spoke about briefly too, the highlight from the first round, winning by 46 points over Port Adelaide. The Eagles looked as though it was going to be a 3-figure belting at one point to the Gold Coast Suns, particularly at half-time, but they managed to keep it respectable afterwards. I think they narrowly won the second half, but end up losing to the tune of 59 points. How do we assess what we're going to see, particularly with North Melbourne's sort of revitalisation with everything that they're trying to do to bring the pieces together? And for the West Coast Eagles, it's sort of those little wins here and there.
Yeah, it's hard to say. West Coast did significantly better in the second half than I expected. I had it on in the background for the first half and was not really paying much attention. And by the time I looked back again at 4-quarter time, I was like, oh, okay, it's not as bad a smashing as I expected. So I didn't get to see as much of this game as I would have liked. That being said, North I did get to watch a bit of, and they just looked better. And it's one of those situations where I don't think they had a lot of issues to deal with defensively. So I mean, perhaps they got off a little scot-free with not having the waters tested too much. But I also think that they might have a similar situation this week. So perhaps it is another win for North, as I did like their ball movement from centre. They seem to be able to get things done in the forward line, and hopefully they can find a way to do it 2 weeks in a row and start to develop some momentum.
And we probably may see the fruits of the labour starting to emerge, because it took a while when Alistair Clarkson was at Hawthorn for the team to really click. I think he took over in 2005 and it took those couple of seasons until 2007, which they eventually made finals for the first time in 6 years at that point. So may be the same upward trajectory for North Melbourne for what does occur going into 2026. And I sort of go back to Port Adelaide, but this is maybe a little bit of a different case scenario when Ken Hinkley took over in 2013. I think Port Adelaide started out season 5-0 and made finals, finished 7th that year. Not to say that the Roos will play in September football, but it's those whole pieces there. They've been together for some time now, at least 2, 3, 4 seasons for most of the players. So there's a lot of areas that they've got together that they're working on, and it's going to be tested against those top 4 teams, at least when the time does arrive. Anything else, Woody, just from the game with any other sort of
Look,
matchups perhaps?
it's been close matches historically between these two. So I think we'll be seeing another one. I dare say that this won't be some team getting off the leash and running away by 50, 100 points. So I'm excited to see what, these two sides can do against a skill level that has, for the last few years, been on a similar plane to each other. And perhaps it gives further opportunities to these youngsters in West Coast that are starting to get their feet in Lindsay, Dersma, Cooper Duff Tyler, Milan, all these kids. Milan's not a kid, but yeah, it seems as though this is a prime opportunity for both sides, and I'm excited to see what happens.
It should be one of those games, I think, too, that at least for the Eagles really test themselves, and for North Melbourne too, away from home, to have that opportunity to put themselves out there and at Optus Stadium, where it's always been pretty hostile territory anyway since West Coast and Fremantle started playing games at the venue in 2018. Well, that does wrap it up here on the AFL show here for the round 2 look ahead episode and what to expect, and also the AFL news making headlines, including former Carlton and Geelong Premiership player Zach Tui hoping that the league will bring back the Gaelic International Rules Series. Hopefully that does transpire next year. In the first couple of weeks, with what we've seen with scoring being on an upward tick and what has caused that. Woody, where can we find all your work and your content for the viewers, listeners to have an access to?
Yeah, so you'll mostly find me on YouTube. I have accounts across most things, but I'm predominantly on YouTube. Doing a fair bit of Super Coach this year. I've enjoyed that, doing some math and trying to figure out the best side to start the season. Did okay, so if you want some help maybe for next year at this point, because it's probably a bit late, feel free to go have a look. Otherwise, yeah, Wooden Spoon Data on YouTube is the place to find me. You'll see me here, Saints TV, other places along the way as well.
Yeah, definitely give Woody's channel a subscribe. He does brilliant work there too. Woody, thank you again for your time for this episode, and we look forward to doing it all again next week.
No, mate, thank you for having me, and yeah, very keen for this time next week.
Don't forget as well, listeners, that you can also tune into the show through your various podcast feeds, through Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget as well to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll see you back here next week for the look ahead to round 3. Awesome, Woody.
Perfect, mate.